Guys, we made it to the last lecture of the year. I know you guys have been patiently awaiting this. The War in the Pacific. Okay, we're learning about the U.S. strategy in the Pacific, how we're going to go about defeating Japan, and the essential question here is how did we ultimately defeat the Japanese Empire at the end of the Second World War?
So as we talked about last section, our priority, FDR's priority, was to go after Hitler first, because we need to build up adequate navy and mobilize enough men to fight the Japanese in the Pacific. Also because the Japanese weren't technically threatening the United States. Now, the attack on Pearl Harbor was intended to demoralize the United States and potentially give us a knockout punch before the war even began for us. And while we were regrouping from the attack on Pearl Harbor, you can see Japan has further expanded in 1942 to Thailand, Burma, French Indochina, British Malaysia. And the reason they're able to do that so easily is because the French, like I mentioned before, the French and the British are busy fighting Hitler and don't have the manpower or the resources to commit to defending their colonies against Japan. And honestly, that's the furthest thing from their minds at this point. And so we'll talk about how the United States really wanted to focus primarily on stopping the Japanese expansion prior to Australia and New Zealand, which would then make it extremely difficult for the Americans to stop the Japanese if they were able to take those two island nations.
Right, so the Japanese actually attacked the Philippines the same day they attacked Pearl Harbor, but because of the international date line, that happens the day after. You didn't know that? So the Americans are kind of forced out of the Philippines. MacArthur is the American general. He's the guy that helped gas the bonus army. It's one of his many accomplishments. But was basically the preeminent American general, and he had been in the Philippines for a while. And his forces eventually get surrounded, cut off, and he is forced to abandon his post in the Philippines and sneak down on a submarine in the middle of the night. And while his men there are left for the Bataan Death March, which is exciting.
It was a long fight. It wasn't overnight. It took months and months, and the United States did not want to pull out of the Philippines, recognizing how crucial that area was. But eventually they had no choice. Remember, the United States of America is more or less allowing Japan to expand because we just don't have the ability to stop them yet. But with this Japanese expansion had come this sense of invincibility throughout the Japanese Empire, that they could not be beat, that they were supreme to the United States both on land, in the air, and in the water. But the first chink in their armor came when James Doolittle had the air raids in Tokyo and 4 or 5 other Japanese cities in April 1942, which was just like Pearl Harbor was a surprise attack to the United States. This was a huge surprise attack to Japan, extremely effective, bombing many cities in Japan and pretty debilitating attacks. And this was really the first chink in the armor to the Japanese, and they realized that this was going to be a long fight with the United States.
In May 1942, we stopped the Japanese advance, finally, at the Battle of Coral Sea. We're basically using Hawaii and Australia as our main staging points to get ready for this war and kind of build up our forces. The Battle of Coral Sea happens on this map down here, right, which stops the Japanese advance towards Australia. And if they had been able to capture this island, they would have been able to kind of use air power to cut off the shipping lanes into Australia, which would have made it very difficult for us to build up any kind of forces there. Right. By stopping them here, it was kind of a draw of a battle, but we didn't allow them to advance. So it was kind of the first time we actually stopped the Japanese Navy from advancing.
Now, just following the Battle of Coral Sea is the Battle of Midway, and the United States receives information that says that the Japanese are attempting to head towards Hawaii once again. And the United States eventually, on their way to Hawaii, they would be stopping at Midway. Because remember, the Japanese recognize that if they don't take out the United States soon, now that we've committed to this war, they're going to have a really hard time defeating us. We pick up on the communications, and we know exactly where they're headed. And Admiral Chester Nimitz takes a huge fleet to the Midway Islands. You could go to the next slide real quick, Coach. So right here, right, so you can see that it is on the way to Hawaii. June 4th to June 7th, 1942. And we have a surprise attack on the Japanese fleet. And it is an incredibly successful battle. Real cool thing about this battle is that it's a naval battle in which the planes were fighting each other. The ships and the aircraft carriers couldn't even see each other. They were so far away, they were past the horizon. And they couldn't even see each other when they were fighting each other, which is really sort of cool to think about. But 110 Japanese ships were there total. 4, not all of them destroyed, but many of them destroyed. 4 aircraft carriers, though. And these are the crown jewels of a naval force. The aircraft carriers take 6 months to a year to build. They take hundreds of millions of dollars to build. So you can't just replace these. And if you lose these, it really limits your ability to fight on the sea because you can't go anywhere carrying your aircraft if you don't have aircraft.
Before Midway, before Coral Sea, naval battles were decided by battleships. Mm-hmm. Those 2 battles established the aircraft carrier as the key force in your Navy, right, which is still has never changed since then. Right? So losing 4 carriers was a huge blow to the Japanese in Midway.
And this is often seen in retrospect when people look back on the war in the Pacific. Midway is seen as the turning point in the war because it's so debilitating to Japan. Right after Midway, we invade and win the Battle of Guadalcanal. And from there, we begin right there. And if you go back to the map, and from there, we begin to really push the Japanese back. And what we decide to do is, seeing that the Japanese have all these strongholds all over the Pacific, the question becomes, well, how are we going to approach taking out the Japanese? And we decide to do something called island hopping, in which we'll actually avoid Japanese strongholds. We'll go around the islands and areas which they've defended, built up really strong defenses, and we'll just go past them. And we'll take out the islands in which they haven't built up strong defenses, which will allow for staging grounds for us to actually invade the Philippines and then Japan.
Yeah, so we slowly move through. Guadalcanal is our first major victory on an island. This cuts off the Japanese trying to build an air base there, which again would have stopped us from supplying Australia. Once we won, we were able to move up and take Guam, take Saipan, take the Philippines. All right, and that leads us to basically 1945. The Japanese are getting more and more desperate. As we talked about in the previous lecture, the Japanese soldier is very devoted to his emperor. We start seeing the kamikazes come out. And this happens after the Battle of Leyte Gulf, which is the naval battle that kind of helps us invade the Philippines. Kamikaze is a Japanese pilot that's using his plane as a bomb. Right? They fly their planes into the target instead of dropping bombs on them. Right? So these guys were very, very devoted, very, very fanatical to the belief of kind of fighting back the Americans and fighting for their emperor.
Yeah, you can understand why a kamikaze would be such an effective weapon because you have basically a bomb with a pilot controlling it. They're extremely difficult to shoot down. If you're on a ship and there's a kamikaze coming towards you, there's very little you can do to prevent that from the kamikaze from hitting you. And so they were very effective, and here's actually a picture of a kamikaze attack on a ship, but they weren't effective enough. We won the Battle of Leyte Gulf. We actually the Japanese suffered huge losses again at the Battle of Leyte Gulf, and that was really the beginning of the end, because from there we had taken the Philippines back, and now we were just getting ready to march and hop closer and closer to Japan.
We're looking now for bases we can use to launch our long-range bombers and really hit the Japanese cities and Japanese mainland in really heavy numbers, like the way we were bombing Germany during the war.
The next 2 battles we'll talk about are Iwo Jima and Okinawa. And if you go back to the map one more time, just to show you guys where these 2 are, they're right here, right? So here's the mainland of Japan. And the importance about Iwo Jima and Okinawa is, did we need these islands? Like, just looking at face value, no, we don't need them. They're just islands. Especially Iwo Jima. It was a crappy little island in the middle of nowhere. But if we don't have them, we won't be able to send any effective air attacks to Japan. The Japanese will be able to defend this region south of the Japanese archipelago, and we won't be able to attack. So while they don't seem important, in the overall strategy, they were incredibly important. And in order to defeat Japan, we had to take these 2 islands.
And part of this too is we talked about this. It's the Bushido Code in the Japanese culture. It's very dishonorable to surrender. And as the war was dragging on, it was becoming more clear that the Japanese were losing. And the Japanese soldiers became more and more devoted and fanatical and willing to die. They would do banzai charges, which were literally suicidal bayonet charges on American positions and machine guns. And if you look at the battle of Iwo Jima, 6,000 Marines are killed. Over 20,000 Japanese were killed. That was almost the entire garrison of the island. Right? And I think we captured like a handful of Japanese soldiers.
And one thing to keep in mind is the Japanese believe through this Bushido Code, if they die for the emperor, then they'll be given, everlasting life. So it's not like they're killing themselves. They're actually just starting the beginning of, a journey that will go on.
Same thing for the kamikaze pilots.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So, I mean, we're literally fighting the Japanese to the last man on these islands.
And another thing we want to keep in mind, Iwo Jima and Okinawa are much more brutal, much more difficult fighting. Not to say the others were not, but these two, the Japanese were definitely going to defend to the last man, because these two islands are the first time the Allied forces, the Americans mostly, have landed on actual Japanese islands. So landing on Iwo Jima and Okinawa signifies an invasion of the Japanese Empire, right? Taking the Philippines back wasn't an invasion of the empire. They were taking back land that Japan had taken from America. Same with Coral Sea, Guadalcanal, Midway. None of those were invasions. These two were actual invasions of the Japanese Empire. And so that was extremely important. And Mr. Minelski mentioned the death rate of Iwo Jima. The death rate of Okinawa was incredible.
And Okinawa is a populated island.
Yeah.
There's a lot of Japanese civilians that were killed during this battle. There's lots of people that lived there. It's a bigger island. It was a brutal slog through the battle at Okinawa. And the kamikazes, the banzai charges, the suicidal attacks. It never ended. It's never safe. You literally, as an American soldier, trying to clear out these tunnels, these places where they were hiding. You had no idea when something could go off, something was booby trapped, and it was really, really difficult to fight these battles.
And seeing how difficult these battles were, what it showed the Allied powers in the U.S. in particular is that an invasion of the actual island of Japan will be incredibly difficult. Because the Japanese adhere to the Bushido Code, they're going to fight to the last man, and this could cost us hundreds of thousands. Winston Churchill estimated 1 million Americans, although most historians have debunked that as an exaggeration, but still a ton nonetheless. Another thing that people don't like to talk about a lot when considering our decision to bomb the Japanese is that we didn't really have any money left. The United States of America, over the last 4+ years, has pretty much run out of money. We don't have the money for an invasion of the Japanese mainland. It would cost hundreds and hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars, and we just didn't have the cash. So that leads us to the Manhattan Project.
This has been theoretically possible since the 30s. They've been developing it. Einstein was part of it. Right? It was so secret that Truman didn't know about it until he was president. Right? So the Vice President of the United States didn't even know about it until he became president. This is J. Robert Oppenheimer. He is the lead scientist in the Manhattan Project. And they tested the first one in New Mexico, and you can see the flash very far away.
Yeah, and over 600,000 people actually worked on this project, but only a few of them knew
what exactly they were doing, what the point was, and we decided to use it.
So then that leads us to the moral question: should we use the bomb? Should we maybe drop it on an empty island just to show the Japanese how destructive it could be? And we decided, for a few different reasons, that we needed to use it. We needed to drop it on a populated city because we figured nothing less than doing that would convince them. So seeing a test is not going to convince them. We'd just be wasting a bomb. It might be a dud, or one concern, which wasn't serious, they might move American POWs to the spot where we plan on dropping it, and we might kill our own men. Truman didn't tell the Japanese exactly what we were going to do. He just warned them of prompt and utter destruction. And that leads us to the dropping of the bomb. Here's a picture of Hiroshima, the first Japanese city that we dropped on. This picture of the bomb itself. You exploding. So on August 6th, we dropped it on Hiroshima. August 9th, we dropped it on Nagasaki.
Killed approximately 200,000 people. Also, the residual effects of an atomic bomb, the radiation, the cancer rates there are like significantly higher.
Yeah.
I mean, it still has an effect on these areas today. And after dropping 2 bombs, we kind of proved to Japan that we were serious, and we actually didn't have any more left.
Yeah, we didn't have any more left.
We used both of them.
It worked out that they surrendered, and actually the War Council was split 3-3 on whether or not to surrender. Like, no joke, half of the Japanese on the War Council still wanted to fight the war, even after we destroyed 2 major Japanese cities. But the emperor finally stepped in, seeing the suffering of his people. He couldn't allow their pride and their stubbornness to make, to force more people to die. So on September 7th, the Japanese surrendered aboard the Missouri, which is, rubbing salt in the wound of the Japanese. This is one of the ships they tried to destroy in the attack on Pearl Harbor, but were unable to. And we were able to prepare it, send it out to Japan, and Japanese officially capitulated.
All right, guys. Thank you very much for watching. If you have any questions, make sure to ask Chris.